Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. King's Landing 2098 AC. Ned. He arranged the meal as quickly as he could. They'd soon be having a much larger family meal as Arya was due to arrive in a day or two. Winifred and Willa even earlier, and he knew how much Robb wished to see his betrothed once more. As for himself, Elle would arrive by the end of the week, and he felt his own eagerness to be reunited with his wife too. That the war had ended as quickly as it did was something he was most grateful for. He'd missed out on the birth of one of his children because of a war. He'd promised himself he'd not miss out on another. When it came to the meal itself, though, he found he was nervous. He wondered how Cregan would take the offer. Would it seem like a poor substitute for what the boy truly deserved? What he was entitled to? True, he'd told them all repeatedly that he didn't wish to push his claim, and had no interest in taking Winterfell in the north, but it was still his by right. Ned knew. Despite how he felt about Winifred, Robb would give up his claim if it was asked of him, but it had never been, and Cregan had seemed horrified by even the prospect of taking over as Lord of the North. Would Lord of Sea Dragon Point feel like a letdown compared to that? He didn't know and could only hope he was making the right decision. Relax, father. He'll either wish it and see it in the manner in which it's been offered, or he'll wish no part of it, Robb said, and Ned chuckled. When did my son get so wise? He asked with his smirk still on his face. When my father allowed me to go to White Harbor, Robb replied. Hearing the knock on the door, Ned answered it himself to find Cregan standing there, his nephew looking more and more like Brandon each day. Come in, nephew, Dusk not with you? Ned asked. No, uncle, he, Ghost, Fang, and Grey Wind are with Laya in the Kingswood. It seems the pack wished to hunt, and his grace had them escorted to the gates. Cregan said as he stepped into the room. He smiled at that. The wolves were running free. Only Nymeria, Summer, and Frost, missing from the pack now, and one of those soon to be here. Taking a seat, they ate. The meal was simple enough, and unlike the meals Jacaerys had told him he'd been forced to endure, far less formal. They spoke on Alshar's arrival the day before, and of Arya's soon to come. Cregan looking forward to seeing his cousin as much as Ned was to having his daughter close to him once more. Your mother, she's settling in well? He asked. She is, uncle. She and Lord Jerian are spending a quiet night together, Cregan said. Father, Robb said, and he nodded. Cregan, I do have an ulterior motive for asking you to join us for dinner. Not that I don't welcome your company, but I'd like to speak to you on your future, he said, and heard the boy sigh. I told you both. I don't want it, Cregan said. I know that, lad, but things are about to change no matter what we want. Your mother will no longer need to hide who she is. Very soon. I'm sure my nephew will be eager for her to be herself once more, as no doubt Lady Ashera wishes as well. I've asked him to hold off so we could speak, so I could present this offer to you. I know you don't wish Winterfell, he said, raising his hand when Cregan went to interrupt. Cregan, what my father is trying to say, badly. Robb said to a chuckle from Cregan, is we'd like to name you as Lord of Sea Dragon Point. Jon has offered to help fund a keep, and we need a loyal and good man there. We'd ask you to be Admiral of the North's Western Fleet, to help protect the trading routes. You'd be head of your own house, a lordly house, Robb said. Ned saw Cregan look at them both, a look of shock and surprise on his face as he contemplated the offer, though he hadn't turned it down outright, which Ned was grateful for. I don't know what to say, Cregan said, looking at them both. This wouldn't cause an issue. Your bannermen wouldn't see this as a chance to use me. His Grace said, you can, if you wish to, form a new house, a cadet branch of House Stark. If you did, then it would be no different than House Core Stark. In terms of issues with our bannermen, this actually would solve so very many. They'd see Brandon's son be treated as he should, be respected and welcomed into the North. Ned said, it would give us a chance to get to know each other better. Cousin, Winterfell is less than a week from where your keep would be, and Bear Island even less, Robb added. I don't know what to say. Cregan said, and Ned saw the boy was still a little stunned. You don't need to say anything tonight, Cregan. Think on it. Speak to your mother. If you accept, then when we go back north, you could come with us. You could visit Winterfell and see the lands for yourself, even help with the work on the keep's design and placement. Ned said, and Cregan nodded. I thank you for the offer, uncle. It's most generous. I need time to think to get it right in my head. This is so unexpected. I'd never. That's quite all right, nephew, as I said. Think on it and let me know. When Cregan left that night, he felt that he may very well have done something right for once. He hoped he accepted both because he'd like to have his nephew close, and he had no other idea how to appease people about the truth of Brandon's son. That he didn't know for so long would be understandable, that once he did, he kept it to himself, even if it was for the right reasons may not. However, were it to be revealed with a plan in place, it would be a much easier sell to his bannermen. "I think he'll accept it, father," Robb said. "I hope so, son." It took him 2 days and Aerys' arrival to do so. Cregan coming to him with his mother to say he was most grateful and that, yes, he'd be Lord of Sea Dragon Point if the offer was still open. As for Arya herself, gods, it was like looking at Lyanna reborn. More so, given the stories he'd heard about the attacks by the Ironborn and what she had done to Theon Greyjoy. Ned had needed to hold back Robb when he saw his former friend. If there had ever been a doubt about Lyanna being kidnapped and held against her will, if he'd ever thought she'd truly been raped, then what Arya had done would prove that impossible. "You are sure you're unhurt?" he said to her as they walked down the halls to the royal apartments. "Of course I am. Nymeria warned me, father, and I used my knife," Arya said, and he stopped and hugged her once more, glad to feel her hug him back. "My wild she-wolf," he said, feeling and then seeing her smile. "I'm so very proud of you, Arya, so very proud." They were brought into the rooms and found James Hurts waiting for them. For once his nephew was alone and he saw how much that pleased Arya. It was rare to find him that way these days. His nephew spending as much time as he could with his wife, his family, or with Lord Gerion's daughter Joy, since she died. "Jon," Arya shouted and he moved to correct her, but never got the chance to. "Little wolf," Daenerys said as he swung her in the air. Arya's laughter and calling a king stupid, making Ned shake his head and grin warmly. King's Landing 298 AC. "Jasimi." His fingers moved softly over her swollen belly. Gacy was asleep as he just looked at her and took her in before she woke. It was something he had spent most of the night doing, just staring at her, taking her in, and being happy that she was finally back in his arms. Seeing her and Joanna was such a relief, such a boon to his spirit that he wondered how he'd managed to spend so much time apart from them. Only to find it actually wasn't that much. All in all, he'd been apart for them for less than 6 moons. That's how long it had taken to win a throne and settle into his new life. A life they'd be a part of now. He'd had the Tower of the Hand almost completely redone, the rooms laid out far better, and he had it furnished it better. He'd filled it with books, toys for Joanna, and training equipment for his wife, as he knew she'd wish to spar once she could. Yadimi hadn't spared any coin, making it as comfortable as it possibly could be for his family. His soon-to-be growing family, he thought with a smile. He laughed when he felt the slap on his head, turning to see Daisy looking down at him. "Don't you have somewhere you need to be?" his wife said, rolling her eyes at him. "No, here is where I want to be," he said petulantly. "Yadimi, you have arrangements to make. A king to crown, remember. I don't want to meet with the fat man. Gods, the man drones on and on and on. His little barbed comments about whether his grace is truly faithful or how important the faith is irks me so." "Jaime," she said, doing her best to be reproachful. "The faith is the pillar of our society. Lord Hand, we must ensure that the crown and the faith are as one," he said, making her laugh as he did what he thought was a passable mummery of the man. "Yet it is up to the Lord Hand to see the arrangements are done," Daisy said. "Let Olenna handle it," he said, moving up beside her, snuggling close. "We'd better not. The faith already thinks Jay is a heathen." "What will they think if his good grandmother murders the High Septon?" she said, and he burst out laughing. This was what he needed. His wife to give him a kick up his arse when he didn't wish to face the day. Joanna to make him smile when she played with her toys as he looked over dull paperwork. That when he looked down at his wife's swollen belly, the thoughts of a new babe would brighten even the darkest days when work bore down on him. "Fine, I'll do some of this work thing then," he said, kissing her as he got up from the bed. After dressing and looking in on Joanna, who was still asleep, he made his way to his office and looked over his day's work. Papers to sign, meetings to be held, and only one that he actually looked forward to. Still, he did as much as he could before the fat man arrived and then struggled through that meeting, reassuring him and telling him that the future queen would no doubt be seeking him out very soon in relation to the wedding. The issues over the coronation itself weren't that difficult to resolve. The High Septon more wishing to see that Jaime cared about the faith, or that the queen did, rather than to moan too much about James' own lack of caring. Once he had gone, Jaime did some more work before stopping for lunch with Daisy and Joanna. Finding Daisy's family and Tyrion joining them, which he appreciated, he was missing working with his brother. And while Tyrion helped out when he could, Jaime knew he was only killing time until he could travel to Dorne. He knew his brother had hoped Arianne would come to swear fealty. But with Oberyn already there, it was not to be, and it would be Tyrion going to Dorne before the wedding that would be the first time he'd get the chance to meet up at her, rather than earlier as he wished. "You going to the small council meeting?" Tyrion asked as they walked down the halls. "Aye, what of you?" "Meeting with Jaime and Jon," Tyrion said, smiling. "It's good, with you and them?" he asked. "Aye, strange but good Jaime and I are. The trip to the wall brought us even closer. As for Aemon, I've never known a man with so much knowledge. I could sit listening to him discuss books for days," Tyrion said. "Have you spoken to Jerion?" "Aye, he's much better, brother, having Joy here, Ashara, too." Tyrion said, a note of longing in his voice that made it clear who he was thinking of. "When are you heading to Dorne?" he asked with a smirk. "I'm not after the coronation," Tyrion said when he caught him looking at him. "I wish her to come to the wedding, and Jade suggested perhaps a dragon ride would make it easier," Tyrion said, and Jaime nodded. "I wish you good fortune, brother," he said. Turning from Tyrion, he made his way up the stairs, and then into the small council rooms to find he was the last to arrive. Jaxley, Margaery, Olenna, and Ser Richard, along with Barristan and Oberyn, who seemed in a much happier mood since Ellaria arrived. Already there, waiting. "Really, Lord Hyand, this is most tardy of you," James said with a smile. "Forgive me, your grace, but I was only following your lead," he said, watching as Olenna rolled her eyes. Having said the very same thing to Jay the day before, when he'd been so preoccupied with spending time with Joy that he'd kept them all waiting. "Well, please ensure it doesn't happen again, Lord Hyand. Tardiness is apparently a serious thing," Jack said as he took his seat. "Indeed, it is your grace. I promise to try harder in the future, just as your grace promised yesterday," he said to Lass. He took his seat and looked to see the notes in front of Jaxay. So far they'd discussed minor things, some small appointments, and the realm in general. Today it seemed to be far more serious if his king was bringing notes. Though he had expected the closer they got to the coronation that to be the case, he found himself excited to see what plans they were about to discuss. "Before we get started, I've drawn up some thoughts, some appointments, changes, some other things I wish to speak on. And I'd like in this room for us to speak freely. Here we can dispense with titles and formalities once we begin. I'll not have us sitting around worrying about them when we should be worrying about the plans or decisions we make, instead," James said, and Jaime saw Oberyn nod. "Aye, nephew, let's not waste time," Oberyn said, and Jaime wondered if it was the formalities being dispensed with, or the fact his paramour was here that made Oberyn so readily agree. "Firstly, Sir Richard, the state of the realm, if you please," Jack said. "The Northwest and Reach are completely secure and behind you, Jax. The Riverlands are, while not in disarray, disunited and wondering where they go from here. The loyal houses who supported you wonder how you'll handle those who supported House Tully. The Stormlords are concerned that you may strip House Baratheon of its rights, and Dorne worries about the loss of so many lords and knights. As for the Vale and the Iron Islands, you're skipping over the Crown Lands?" Olenna asked. "Are remarkably unaffected, my lady," Sextus Richard said. "In the Iron Islands, the king's mood has yet to take place. Jax, while the Vale still awaits your moves." "Lord Royce," Jay asked, "is en route," Sorgerd said. "Very well. The Reach West, Dorne and North, require no input from the Crown other than to reward those who fought for me." Jane said, "Something we can do over the next few days, and I believe in the case of the Reach and Dorne has already been done." "It has, Jay," Jaime said. "As for the West, I'll discuss it with Lord Yancey in private as I will the North with my uncle." "The Vale, any thoughts? Who is next in line to House Arryn?" Olenna asked. "House Arryn will end Olenna. They'll never rule the Vale again," Jay said. "What of Harold Harding, Jay?" Sarah Richard asked. "I'll not have an Arryn as my Warden of the East and as liege of one of my kingdoms, not even one so far removed from the line." Jay said. "House Royce?" he asked, and Jaxley looked at him. "Lord Yerden is a good man. He didn't bring his arms to bear against my uncle, but I need to meet him and take his measure first. House Grafton were always leal men to my family, and if not Royce, then I'll name them, unless there are objections." Jay asked, looking around. "You'll leave Sir Harold as Lord of the Eyrie?" Margaery asked. Hey, you were right about that, Jay said with a nod. The Stormlands I intend to name my cousin as Lord Paramount. Renly still hasn't recovered. And from Sir Richard's information is a bad choice. So you'll name a girl? Olenna asked. I will. Elena will appoint a regent, but Shireen is the best choice. Both my aunts speak highly of the girl, and she's trueborn, Jack said. Sir Davos, Jay, he's the best choice for regent, Sir Richard said, and Jay nodded. The Iron Islands need to be brought to heel, but I wish to speak to Asha Greyjoy first. Jay said next, you intend to name a woman Lord Reaper, Oberyn said, smirking. Sir Richard tells me Asha is a different sort, and she'll maybe be a good choice. I need to see her reactions to her brother's fate first, Jane said. You'll take his head? Olenna asked. After what he tried to do to Arya, had she not already taken his manhood then, I'd take that first, Jane said angrily, and Jaime watched as Marjorie reached over to stroke his arm, and how quickly it relaxed him. He tried not to smirk as he knew he was just the same. Euron and Victarion may be a problem, J.J., Euron especially. He's been calling himself King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea, Sir Richard said. Then he'll be in for a big surprise. We don't have room in Westeros for more than one king. Jade said to a nod from Olenna. The Riverlands, Jay, he asked. House Blackwood, Jaime. He saw the looks around the table, Olenna and Oberyn not seeming to agree, and Marjorie looking as if she very much did. Given his own limited knowledge of things, he wasn't sure if it was the best idea. Even he had heard of the Blackwood and Bracken feud. Sir Richard seemed to be deep in thought, also. House Bracken won't like it, Jay, Oberyn said, speaking the thoughts they all had. No, but my queen has come up with a solution for that, Jay said proudly. Marguerite? Olenna asked, surprised. Marriage, grandmother. Lord Titus's heir to Lord Jonas's daughter. Both sides fought for Jay House Blackwood, even came to House Bracken's aid when they were besieged. They marched together. Did they not, Sir Richard? Marjorie asked. They did, but weddings have been tried between them in the past. None could get them to agree, my queen, Richard said. Never was the son of that union in line to be a Lord Paramount, Marjorie said, and even Jaime had to nod at that. Does anyone object? Jay asked, and he saw the nods to show that no one did. Good, next we come to the council itself. As he walked back to his room, he found himself happy with his day's work. Some of the things he and Jay had spoken about years earlier would be soon done. Changes were soon to be made to how the crown was protected and to the makeup of the small council itself. That some of his suggestions had been turned down only made him happier. Jay taking his advice, Oberyn's, Olenna's, and especially Marjorie's, and yet mainly it was his own choices that he was following through on. It was the best of both worlds, a king with a plan, a vision for the future, but one who would listen and consider other better ideas. One who was not afraid to admit he was wrong and that others knew better, and yet one who also was not going to be pressured into going against what was right or what he thought was best. They'd spoken about not killing Theon Greyjoy near the end of their meeting. Jaime, despite his own feelings on the man, had actually come to change his mind at the end. His role as hand-trumping his role as a father and husband. Would it not be for the best to let Theon live, maybe allow him to take the black, he asked, as the meeting was coming to an end. Why? Marjorie asked, annoyed at the thoughts of a wannabe rapist going somewhat free. Something he agreed with her on, but politics sometimes demanded another way. We could more easily manage his sister if he lived, he said. No Greyjoy dies, and before you ask, I do have personal reasons to see him dead. It was my little sister he tried to rape. Even were it not, I'd still see him lose his head. Any man who seeks to harm a woman that way should know the punishment they face. Losing their manhoods is not enough. The wall is not enough. Ask any woman, and I wager they'd say the same. Jaime, yet Greyjoy's crimes are even more than simply that. He was hostage to his father's good behavior, and he stole himself away. Not content with that, he participated in an attack on those very lands. His imprisonment was mainly to guarantee against. As he entered his rooms and heard his wife laughing with Joanna, he felt eager, both for the night to come and the morrow. Finally, he was beginning to enjoy his work. King's Landing 2098 AC. Sansa, the Red Keep was a much different place when you stayed in it. Rather than just visited and she much preferred the former. Though she was still getting used to the extra guards that were around and the 4 that had been assigned to her by her brother. Jon explaining to her that she needed to be seen with the black and red cloaks of the royal guard from now on. That her brother was king was something she was having difficulty getting used to. Not that he had not been so for some time, but that he was all but officially now the king meant she, like others, faced a period of adjustment. Protocols, propriety, having to address him a different way in public was hard enough, especially as she was still trying to come to terms with getting used to calling him Jay rather than Jon, and not doing so as well she should. Her brother, noticing her struggle, had simply told her to call him brother, just as he still referred to her as his little sister. And though she tried, it was still mostly the names she fell back on. Tonight, though, she'd be meeting his family, his other family, and she was nervous about that too. She'd seen Daenerys and Shira only briefly since she'd arrived and hadn't spoken to them yet. Not out of any hesitation on her part or theirs, but mainly because they'd all been too busy to be formally introduced. Tonight, though, she and Margaery would be officially introduced to Jaehaerys' other family, and she felt her nerves rise up once more. Would they like her, and if they did not, would it somehow change things between her and Jon? She doubted it would, but a small voice at the back of her head wouldn't be quietened. "Are you ready?" she heard Margaery say, and she was glad her friend had come to her to walk to the private dining rooms rather than allow her go alone. She had thought Margaery would go with Jay, but instead had been relieved when she found out she would join her instead. "Hi," she said shakily. "Don't be nervous," Margaery said, looking at her and taking her hand. "How are you not?" she asked, to a grin from Margaery. "Because I know Jay, he seems happy with having them here. Sansa, do you think he'd be so if they were terrible, horrible people?" "No," she said, relaxing somewhat. "No," Margaery said, smiling. As they walked, Margaery told her more of Willis's appointment. It was something she was so proud of him for, and Margaery was too, given how she spoke. He deserved a seat on the small council, more so than any to her mind, though she had at first worried that it would mean she'd not see him from now on. Something she had worried about with Margaery as well, the idea of being in Highgarden without them both, not one she cared for. Though Jay had told her that she could if she wished to do her fostering here, and were that not enough, Margaery had then asked and she'd accepted to be one of her ladies in waiting. "We're here," Margaery said, and she cleared her mind and took a deep breath, walking inside to find Jon standing there with his aunts and uncles. If she had thought that the brief views of the Targaryens she'd had may have done them justice, it was clear now she had been so very wrong. They were beautiful, truly beautiful. Compared to Jon's aunts, she looked like a silly, ugly little girl. Their silver hair, Daenerys' violet eyes, Shira's mismatched ones that were so like Tyrion's. They looked so very different on her face. As for Aemon, though Margaery had explained it somewhat, it still made no sense. The man in front of her was almost 100 name days old, and yet looked younger than her father. "Margaery, Sansa, my aunts Daenerys Stormborn and Shira Seastar, aunts my wife Margaery, and my little sister Sansa Stark," Jon said, smiling as he looked at them all. "Princess," Margaery said. "Your Grace," Daenerys replied, and Sansa looked on as Jon introduced his uncles and as Margaery spoke to them, while Jon held her hand, and as she then came face to face with the youngest of the two women. "Jex told me so much about you, Sansa. It's so good to finally meet the little sister he speaks so highly of." Jane stayed looking at her with a friendly smile on her face. "Princess," she said, with a curtsy. "Call me Dany," the princess said, and Sansa smiled back as she said her name. Walking back to her room that night, she was floating on air. Dany was unlike anyone she'd ever met other than the Mormonts and Prince Oberyn's daughters. While Shira was as much of a lady as one could ever be, Dany was both one and not, and soon she found herself and Margaery joining as they japed at Jon's expense. As for her brother, he practically beamed all night, so happy was he. She watched as he looked on as Margaery enchanted both his aunts and his uncle, as he saw her laughing when Dany spoke of her times in Essos. Each time she caught his eye, she could see just how happy he was that they were all getting along so well. Waking the next morning and breaking her fast, she waited for Wellas to arrive for their walk. Though not as pretty as Highgarden and far less pleasant to her nose, she enjoyed the newer views the Red Keep offered. When she heard the knock on her door, she opened it to find him standing there, the smile on his face once she returned immediately. Fang had returned from her hunt, but Nymeria's arrival had led them back to the Kingswood, Sansa feeling the wolves' own eagerness to spend time with those they cared for. "My lady, shall we?" Wellas said as Sansa took his arm and readied to do the same. King's Landing 2098 AC. The crowning of a king. Margaery. Meeting Jack's family had been far less nerve-wracking than it should have been. She wondered, though, if that was because she had no doubt of how he felt about her, and so she didn't worry, or was it that she knew they'd turn out to be people she'd like? She knew how Jack felt, how he was with the other side of his family, and they with him, and even how he was with her own. So meeting them and knowing he cared for them, a part of her suspected they'd turn out to be just the same as the Starks, and despite their obvious physical differences she looked forward to getting to know them better, though she was a little nervous about Daenerys being named as the Princess of Dragonstone. Not so much about the woman herself. Yen Sierra leaving her in no doubt of her loyalty to him. More it was the idea of what a signal it sent to the realm that rather than a future heir of theirs, her husband had named his aunt as the holder of the island. Though Jay had explained it to her after her grandmother had raised the issue. "Our children," he said, and she felt a momentary flutter. More at the thoughts of more than one than anything else. "Will be well provided for. Marge, my family made a mistake with Dragonstone. It should always belong to our house. But it should be our house, not the crown prince's." "I don't understand. House Targaryen and the crown are intertwined. But this is a bad thing, as it means if the crown falls, then the house falls also. Most houses don't lose their house after a war. Marge, some do, but not most. I wish for ours to be the same. House Targaryen of Dragonstone, and House Targaryen, if King's Landing are to be different, separate but united." "And our children?" she asked. "I intend to rebuild Somber Hall for our firstborn," Jane said, and she looked at him wondering why he'd not said. "Son? Firstborn? You hope for more than one?" she said, laughing. "Numerous, many, countless," he said, kissing her each time, making her laugh and worry a little, all the same. "What if I... Together, Marge, always." "Always," she said, kissing him deeply. In planning for the wedding, her grandmother had told her the importance of birthing heirs, and she also knew how people looked at things. A marriage without heirs was looked upon as a failure by some, more so when that marriage was a royal one. Yet she was nervous, frightened even by the thoughts of birthing a child. She knew Jay was too, and yet she was surprised when he agreed with her that they needed to wait. The older one was the more likely to have a successful birthing. Jay's mother was her age, and that he worried about her so was natural. She wanted children, numerous, many, countless, she thought with a smile. But she wanted them to be just them together for some time too, something that Jay wished for as much as she did. She was glad to realize, as she sat in the Great Sept, she found, as she often did, her mind drifting. They'd be married in less than a moon and be together for the rest of their lives from that point on. It was something she wished for more than anything, and the thoughts of sharing a bed with her husband were ones which she thought of more often than not. It made her heart race and left her short of breath when she thought of them laying together. Sometimes at night she'd close her eyes and her fingers would touch her breast, and she'd pretend they were Jaxley's. She'd wonder if he lay in his bed doing the same as she, and find that she'd feel herself grow more and more excited at the thoughts he would. That he wished for it too. She needed no one to tell her. Jack's eyes doing so each time they kissed, and he looked into her own. Each day they spent together. Each night they lay down beside each other. When he kissed, touched, held hands, or were just alone together, made it harder and harder not to just give in. Yet she feared it too, that it may be uncomfortable, awkward, that she may not please him or him. She'd confided this only with her mother. Not that her grandmother wouldn't have been able to help, but something she felt her mother was better equipped to offer her advice on. "You have nothing to fear, sweetling. I've seen how Jaime Sierras looks at you. There's no way you could ever displease him, and I would say you feel the same about him." "I do, but I don't." "Laying together, Mother, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, what we're supposed to do." "As I'm sure neither does he, Marjorie. Despite what some may tell you, it's better that way. You'll learn together, enjoy together, and yes, at times fail to enjoy together. But I've no doubt you'll find my pleasure in your husband's arms, and he in yours." She'd been given a book by her mother on what to expect, and the thoughts of doing any of that with Jay made her sweat a little and brought those flutters back. Some days she'd find herself looking at him and wondering if he had a little book of his own. As she sat in the Grand Sept, she looked to him standing there in his black and red tunic, her eyes drifting to his tight leather breeches, and she felt her heart race once more. A momentary image of tearing them off floating in her mind. "All rise," the High Septon said, and she stood up shakily and did her best to compose herself. "Jane." He stood with Daisy and held Joanna's hand, watching on as the High Septon walked to stand in front of Jay, the bowl of oil in his hand as he bid Jay kneel. Jane felt his breath quicken as he looked to see the King's Guard stand at the ready, 3 facing 3, swords drawn, their white cloaks as pristine as they had ever been. In a way, he was jealous of them. In another life, he'd be standing beside them, waiting to welcome the new king. Yet as he felt the fingers grip his hand a little more tightly, he knew he wouldn't change where he stood for anyone. We have gathered here today in this sacred place to crown a king, to place upon the head and shoulders of the rightful Lord of the Seven Kingdoms a crown, and the responsibility that goes with it. Each of us, every man, woman, and child, now falls under his protection, his love, and his governance, and we do so willingly here today in the sight of the most devout. Yaxliez Targaryen, do you promise to uphold the law? The High Septon asked. I do. Do you promise to protect the innocent? I do. To uphold the faith? I do. With this holy oil, I do anoint you. Jaime watched on as the hot oil was poured over Jane's head, not a flinch or movement from him as it was done so. He looked on proudly as the pillow carrying the crown was carried forward, the crown of the conqueror himself, and he heard people gasp when they saw it. A Valyrian steel circlet glistening in the lights that shine through the crystal-domed roof of the Great Sept. We the people of the Seven Kingdoms do hereby name you, Jaime Targaryen, the third of your name, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, protector of the realm. We name you King of the Andals, the Rhaegar, and the First Men. We name you our king from this day until your last, the High Septon said loudly as he placed the crown on Jade's head. Jaime looked around the room. Marguerite was smiling broadly, as was surprisingly Ned Stark. Not that he shouldn't, just that Jaime couldn't remember seeing one so true on the man's face ever before. Jaxlistuz, Sansa, Arya, and Joy all wore the same smiles, and that he thought of his cousin as truly as he did his own showed just what kind of a king the realm was lucky enough to be getting. He could see Northmen look on proudly, men of the West just as much, and his own family the happiest of them all. Jenna smiling, and even Kevin doing likewise, while Geryon looked to be on the verge of crying happy tears. Prince Oberyn and Ellaria stood ready to cheer, their girls beside them, and when he looked over to see Tyrion standing with the three Targaryens, he felt a momentary pang. It both hurt and made him proud to see him there, to see him look how he did this day. Both he and Ebbing were wearing matching outfits, black and red in the same style as Jay's own. Daenerys and Shero were like looking into the past, their Valyrian features drawing the eye, and they too wore matching outfits, both wearing beautiful dresses in their house's colors. Rise, King Jaehaerys of House Targaryen, the High Septon said as Jain stood up and turned around to face them. All hail the king, long may he reign. Long may he reign, he cheered as loudly as any, and the noise made that day was far louder than when a stag had been crowned. Sir Barristan Selmy. His eyes moved from Arthur to the king and back, from Jaime to the king and back. He felt himself almost choke up as the High Septon said his words, as he proclaimed Jaehaerys the king. Even though he'd been acting as such since they'd taken this city, though he had seen him as such from the moment he'd spoken to Jaime Lannister all those years earlier. To actually see him named as king was a special moment, and one he would treasure. As he walked down the steps, Barristan gave Arthur and the others the nod, and they raised their swords and created an arc for the king to walk under. Seeing the smile on Jaehaerys' face as he did so made him almost drop his own sword. His prince's son's face looking back at him, and Barristan feeling for the first time in years that all his sins were forgiven. That his king had already done so had always filled him with pride. But now seeing him stroll past them and watching as each of the Kingsguard sheathed their blades and walked to take their position, as the drills he'd had them partake in shone through, it felt even more real. The cheer he heard when he stepped out onto the steps of the Great Sept was as loud than any he could remember. The crowd chanting for the king as he walked to address them was even louder. And then, as if by magic, a simple raise of the king's hand, and suddenly there was silence. Barristan looked on eagerly as Jaehaerys faced them all with a small smile on the king's face before he readied to speak. Today I've been named your king, Jaehaerys, and said to loud cheers. An honor, a privilege, and a sacred duty has been bestowed upon me this day, one which I accept with great humility, and one I shall do my utmost to be worthy of. Though he never raised his voice, each time the cheers died off and Jaehaerys began to speak, he could hear everything. It was as if the crowd's eagerness to listen to their new king aided their quietness. My father, my mother, wished for me to undertake this journey, to regain the throne stolen from my family, and at first, that was my goal, to take back that which was stolen from House Targaryen. Over time, I've come to realize, like so many of us do, that our parents know what's best for us, that the path they set us on may seem a difficult one, but it's one which has your best interests in heart. I started on this journey to take back a throne, to seek justice for my family, and to fulfill their wishes for me. Along the way, I found other reasons why I wished for a crown. I found a people who've not been given a fair shake at life, who've been denied the chance for a better life, not because of what they are, not because they are no good or have no skills, but because they have no name. No more, I say. The cheers resounded around the streets of King's Landing, Barristan sure they'd be heard for miles around. I promised you I'll work to make your lives better. I swore it on my mother and my father. I swore it on fire and blood. Today they named me King of the Seven Kingdoms. But each day I sit that throne. I sit it not as their king, not as my family's king. I sit it as your king. We have a long road to travel until I fulfill the promises I make here to you today. But know this, each day I wake, each day I rise, each day I wear this crown. We travel that road together. Hail King Jacaerys! Hail to our king, Arthur Dayne! The ride to the Red Keep took an age. The crowds all swarming to get a look at the king, and Arthur cursing him for riding a horse rather than a carriage. Yet never once did he feel any danger. Never once did he find himself reaching for dawn. Should anyone dare try to harm the king on this day, then he felt the crowd would be better King's guards than he and his brothers. He'd stood watching as J.K. was crowned and felt both relief and sadness. That they'd made it, done it, seen her wishes carried out. Rhaegar's will carried out was something he felt such relief for. That they had fallen and not seen what their son had done was something that almost broke his heart. Listening to him as he spoke to the crowd, as they told them of what he intended to do, the truth in his words clear to see, he'd never been as proud as he was right then. He knew that there would be failures amongst the successes to come, that Jack would face pushback from lords, the faith, the citadel, even from allies and friends in trying to make people's lives better. Yet that he wished to do so had been something he had spoken to him about more than once. Aegon the Unlikely, Arthur. Aemon told me tales of him years ago when I visited him at Castle Black. Aeg was good king, he said, and he was right, despite what some would say of him. Tywin Lannister repealed most of the laws he put in place regarding the people. Aeg won in favor with the lords, but it served his interests far more than it did the crown's. You intend to reinstate those laws? He asked. I intend to expand them, Jack said. So, listening to his words on the Sept of Baelor, hearing the passion in his voice as he said them and how the people reacted, no, it was not these people he'd ever near fear when it came to Jaime. When they finally reached the Red Keep, he walked with Barristan while the others headed to the throne room. Their destination, the royal apartments, to wait until the others had made it back from the Septet. He could sense as they walked that despite the firmness of his words and the purposeful steps he took, Jax Lyris was nervous too. Given what he was about to do, he could certainly forgive that. He'd not sat the throne since they'd taken it, waiting for this day until he did. Now the time had come, and he and Barristan looked on as Jay paced the room, waiting to be called. Arthur chuckled when Jay looked to him, knowing that look all too well. No, your grace, we can't go for a spar, he said, and Jay laughed loudly. I know, though, I wish I could. Today do you think it went well? He asked, and for one of the few times since he'd served him, he saw the boy he truly was, 5 and 10 years old, and yet now responsible for millions of people and 7 kingdoms. Very well, your grace. Is that not true, Sir Barristan? Aye, it is. Never before have I seen such a reception, your grace, Barristan said, and Arthur saw the brief exhalation of breath from Jaxier when the bold spoke. He heard the knock on the door and walked over to find Tommen standing there. The squire telling them all was ready. It's time, your grace, he said, and saw Jay nod. They walked from the room, and the steps Jane took were even firmer now, the walk seeming to take no time at all, and then the doors were opened and the king was announced. His Grace King Jaehaerys Targaryen, the third of his name, King of the Andals, Rhaegar and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm, the herald called out, and Jay walked into the room. Inside the great and the good of the realm looked on, men took a knee and women went into deep curtsies. His brothers surrounded the throne. 2 stood facing on each of the steps, and he and Barristan took up their own positions either side of the throne itself. Then Jay walked the steps and turned to face the room before finally sitting down. Long live the king, the herald shouted as men rose and women stood straight. Long live the king, the room shouted as one. King's Landing 288 EC. Jaime Targaryen. The night of his coronation was a huge feast, and Jay sat at the high table with Margaery beside him. The Tywes Lannisters, Starks, Oberyn, and finally his own family given pride of place. It was hard not having everyone sit there with them, and he looked out as Sansa, Arya, and Joy at Robb and others who sat at lower tables with regret. But his extended family was so large now that there simply weren't enough seats for everyone, and so Jaime and Daisy represented House Lannister, Mace, Allery, and Olenna represented House Tyrell, along with Margaery, Oberyn and Illardia, his uncle Ned, and finally Tyrion. Tia men filling out the last positions. He knew there were those in the room who took issue with Illyria, sitting with a king, and yet he cared not. His aunt wouldn't be looked down on by anyone in his presence, and he could see both how happy it made Oberyn and her own pride in sitting there. As for the meal itself, it was as extravagant as he feared, and he was happy when it was done. Sending plates down to each of the tables and making sure everyone was treated as respectfully as possible was a new experience for him. The raising of a glass to acknowledge someone, or making eye contact with as many people as possible too, making it more of a chore than a celebration. "You look so uncomfortable," Margaery said quietly. "I didn't know dinner could be this much work," he responded through a put-upon smile. "So I take it we won't have as many feasts as Robert had then," she said, covering up her words with a chuckle. "Gods, no. Should we?" he asked, and she shook her head. "No. Let's keep it to the ones we must," she said to his relief. Once the dishes were sent and the meal finished, it did at least give him something to smile about, asking Margaery to dance and being able to do so without anyone thinking there was anything wrong with it being the cause for that. So much so that halfway through the dance, he was smiling so broadly and truly that Margaery couldn't help but comment. "Now you look happy," she said, smiling at him. "More than happy, my love. I was just thinking." "Of off?" she asked. "Old Town?" he said, surprising her and having her look at him in confusion for a moment before she remembered. "When we couldn't dance," she said, leaning into him. "Aye, one day we'd be able to without anyone ever thinking it was wrong for us to do so," he said, as she looked at him. He felt her lips on his cheek, a soft, almost brushing of them as she kissed him. It was then that the music stopped, and he knew that despite wishing to dance with her exclusively, he needed to ask others. After dancing with Joy and Sansa and not panicking Arya any more than she already was by not asking her to dance. Instead, giving her a smile and nod which showed her the reason why he didn't ask her. Jax danced with both his aunts, Jaina and finally Ilaria, who only had to wait so long because she and Oberyn would barely move from each other. Once he had danced with her, he then got the chance to dance with Margaery once more. And soon the night winded down. The next day he woke early. That he wished the trial so soon was a surprise to most, but he cared not. He wanted it done. The Falcon had lived long enough, and he had sworn to himself that his first official act, once he was crowned, would be to see the man dead. Both Jaime and Olenna had asked him to wait. But he'd said no. Each day the man breathed was an affront to his father's memory, to his mother's, and he'd not wait any longer than he had to. It was midday when they were finally set up. Jax sitting on the throne while Mace, Jaime, and Oberyn sat in judgment. Every single lord they could fit into the throne room was present. Jax even insisting there were some of the largest merchants in the city and some of the local tavern keepers brought in to bear witness to the Falcon's fall. When the man himself was brought in, Jax saw the cocky smile on his face, followed the look of disdain he gave him as he sat on the throne, both looks he wished to see wiped before the day had ended. "Lord Arryn, you are charged with treason, both against his grace and against his family. How do you plead?" Jaime said loudly. "I never swore an oath to him," Jon Arryn said to gasps. "People not best pleased with him being blatantly disrespectful. Yet, by right of blood and conquest, his grace is your king. The crime remains the same. How do you plead?" Jaime asked once more. "I'll receive no fair trial here today, and I've done no wrong," Jon Arryn said, looking around. "You didn't plan with Hoster Tully to see my family deposed from their rightful throne," Jack said, looking at the man. "I rose to remove a tyrant who demanded the heads of my wards. Your grandfather was a madman. Yet, that was not the only reason why you rose, was it, Lord Arryn? How long had you been planning to place Robert Baratheon on the throne? How long did you use the lie that my mother had been kidnapped to aid your plans? Rhaegar Targaryen kidnapped the Lady Lyanna. Everyone knows this," Jon Arryn said. "Sir Arthur Dayne, could you step forward?" Jack said. The room hushed as Arthur stepped forward, Dawn's hilt seen over his shoulder as he stood sideways so he faced the room and the king. Sir Arthur, tell the court of my father and mother. Rhaegar and Lyanna fell in love, your grace. With Elia's consent, their marriage was annulled, and in front of the old gods, and then the new Prince Rhaegar married Lyanna Stark, making her his wife. What proof is there of this? Mace asked, and Jay nodded to Sir Richard Lonmouth, who stepped forward. Other than Sir Arthur's own words, I have letters here written in Prince Rhaegar's own hand, in Princess Lyanna's, and one from Princess Alia. I also have the wedding notices signed by Sir Arthur Dane, Sir Oswell Went, Prince Rhaegar, and Princess Lyanna and High Septon Maynard. Letters which the faith has accepted as proof. Lord Tyrell. Richard said, handing the letters to the three judges. He watched as Jon Arryn squirmed when the letters were read and when each of the judges nodded that they were as had been said, and then he turned to Jon Arryn to see if he'd do what his uncle had said he would. I was unaware of such letters or such an arrangement as was the entire realm, so I cannot be convicted based on things I had no knowledge of. Jon Arryn said, looking to the room. You were unaware, you say? He asked. I was. So my mother never tried to contact Robert or yourself. Never sent a letter to either of you. She did not. We marched under the assumption she had been kidnapped. Neither Robert or myself knew any different. Sir, it's Richard, he said, and his master of whisperers stepped forward again holding another letter, one which had taken using the glass candles to find, Your Grace, a letter from your mother to Robert Baratheon, explaining the truth. Richard said, Where did you get that? Jon Arryn called out. In the king's chambers, Richard said, handing the letter to the judges. I never saw that. Jon Arryn said, his voice panicked. Did you not? So you didn't comfort Robert when he received it, didn't tell him it was a lie, and my mother was playing hard to get. James said, and Jon Arryn gulped. How? He looked at the man and then decided no. He didn't deserve to know how he found it out. He knew those in the room who were closest to him knew, and Jon Arryn didn't deserve to. You used a lie of my mother's kidnapping to fuel your own ambitions, my lord. You, Robert Baratheon, and Hoster Tully all used that lie, and it cost me my uncle, my grandfather and grandmother, my sister, brother, their mother, and my mother and father. We never... Yet that is not the extent of your treason, was it? For you also lied about me when you knew the truth. Did you not? I believed you to be a bastard, a lie, Jon Arryn said, standing a little straighter. Did you now? Lord Rose stepped forward. He watched as the Lord of Roanstone moved to the center of the room. Jon Arryn glaring at the man as Jon Royce stood stiffly while looking straight ahead at him. Lord Royce, your grace, the man said with a small bow. Lord Royce, when did you find out the truth about me? He asked. Before the battle of the Trident against Lord Stark, Jon said. How, my lord? We had marched believing you to be false, your grace. Lord Arryn himself confirmed this to us many times. On the eve of the battle, Lord Stark parleyed with us. He offered us terms and Lord Arryn refused. Instead, he offered his own, which were that Lord Stark would be allowed join the Night's Watch and his son would keep Winterfell, that the North would face no further punishment, and that your grace would lose his head. Yod said to shocked murmurs, How did that prove him a liar? My lord, Jaime asked. He called his grace, Lord Stark's nephew, Lord Hand. When we marched, we did so under the assumption that his grace was Lord Stark's son. Lord Arryn told you this? Oberyn asked. Numerous times, Prince Oberyn, Jon said. Thank you, my lord. Jane Siri heard Lord Yanks turned and walked away, not even sharing a second glance with his former liege. It's clear you never intended to give me a fair trial. You present false documents and testimony, and you call this justice. I call it a trial, Lord Arryn, more than you gave Lady Lysa or Robert Arryn, he said to shouts from the Falcon. How dare you? I was the wronged party. Yet you held no trial, did you, Lord Arryn? You just sent them to the black cells and left them there to rot. But we should not look for honor in such a duplicitous, dishonorable man, such as yourself. Is this court convinced of the validity of Lord Rose's statement, or does it need more proof? He asked, willing to have Estermont brought out, if need be. We are your grace, Mace said. I demand trial by combat, Jon Arryn said loudly. Do you have a champion? Jaime asked. Ned Stark will stand for me, the Falcon said, smiling. When he looked at him, the crowd in shock at the turn of events. Lord Stark, he called, and his uncle stood forward. Will you stand for Lord Arryn? No, his uncle said loudly. Ned, please. Jon Arryn said, looking to his former foster son with a look of pleading as he realized that his uncle hadn't been as taken in as he thought he had. "I'll not sully my honor on a man such as this. Not after the lies he told me during the rebellion have been exposed so clearly and truly. As high as honor, Jon, that's what you were supposed to represent. And it's clear to me, to everyone, that you failed to live up to your words. You are a liar, a traitor, and I spit on the day I met you." Seeing his uncle so angered, so resolute, gave him a sense of kinship with him he'd not had in many a year. Jax felt the last remnants of any anger or annoyance he had at him for how he was raised or what he may have planned for him just fade away, and though he'd thought the rift between them long healed, he truly felt it now, on this day. "Do you have another champion, Lord Arryn?" he asked. And he could see the man was broken, and so after a few moments of silence, he turned to the judges. "My lords, my prince, your verdict?" "Guilty," Oberyn said. "Guilty," Jaime added. "Guilty," Meat said firmly. "Lord Arryn, you have been found guilty of treason. It is the sentence of this court that you shall be taken from here to the dragon pit at dusk and there be executed. Do you have any final words?" Jaime said to silence. "Take him away," Oberyn said, and Jay sat back, relieved, wasn't quite how he felt, and satisfied, didn't cover it either. He was eager, though, eager to see him lose his head, eager to end his life and put aside some of the thoughts of what he'd cost him. King's Landing, 2098 AC. Ned Stark. It had been hard to watch Jon Arryn try and lie his way through the trial, even knowing what he would say and how he would try and defend himself didn't make it any easier. Yet he felt no shame in playing his part, no sympathy for the man as he was brought low. The evidence against him was overwhelming and damning, and Ned felt if ever there was a man who deserved death, then it was his former mentor. He could see it now, how he'd been manipulated, played, and he wondered what his life would have turned out like if Jaime Lannister hadn't taken Jaqrax away all those years ago. Would he have gone through the rest of it as clueless as he had been? Would he and Kat still be together, and he be oblivious to her true nature? What would his children's lives be like? For he knew that even had he not believed his own to be better, which he did, theirs certainly were. Rachel was growing to be a fine northern lady, Sansa though young was fierce and formidable. Robb was already an heir, any man could be proud of, and Bran was soon to be a lord in his own right. Soon enough, they'd have another babe too, a brother or sister to call their own, and he wondered would that have been possible if he'd kept his head buried in the sand. No, he doubted it would. And while being classless had its benefits, he'd not change his life for anything. "Father, why are they holding the execution so quickly?" Robb asked as they rode to the dragon pit. "Our way is the old way, Robb. The man who passes the sentence must swing the sword, and once a man's been found guilty, then he shouldn't see another dawn. His crimes must be answered the day the sentence is reached." Ned said, and Robb nodded. "Will Jared do this himself?" Robb asked, and Ned shook his head. "No, the king uses the king's justice for such things," he said, and Robb nodded. Neither Sansa nor Elle wished to be at the execution. Arya, though, demanded it, saying the man had cost her family as much as he had. Jay and Ned felt so very proud of her for saying so, that he wished his daughter not to be a part of this was a fleeting thought. Were she his son, and this in the north he'd ask her to witness it, so why should it be different that she was his daughter and this was the south? As they reached the dragon pit, he was amazed how full it was. Whether it was his nephew or those who followed his orders, they seemed to have a knack for spectacle. Though, given how the small folk had reacted when Jaehaerys had been crowned, he wouldn't be surprised if it took no organizing at all to get this crowd to come out to see a traitor lose his head. Watching her son sit the throne, seeing him wear the crown, and even during the trail, watching and listening as he spoke, he knew Lyanna was right. Yaxlis was born to be the king, and anything less, for him, would have been an insult to his sister's memory. Hearing Er's excited squeal, he looked up as the 5 dragons flew over the dragon pit. To say it was an impressive sight would be an understatement. And he wondered if others were as awed as he. They were shown to their seats, and he looked to see where Jaehaerys was, only to find he couldn't see him anywhere. Before he had time to wonder about it, he saw the northern lords look to him and heard Yaxley speak. "My lords, ladies, good men and women of King's Landing and Westeros. Earlier today, Jon Arryn was found guilty of treason by order of King Jaehaerys III of his name, King of the Andals, Rodian and First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. He was sentenced to die, and his grace asks you all to witness what fate awaits. Traitors, Jaime said. Ned looked on as Jon Arryn was led out to the wooden block in the middle of the dragon pit, and he watched as people moved forward in their seats. He, like the others, was surprised to see Jaehaerys and the Kingsguard walk towards them, and then he felt the hush of the crowd as his nephew turned to speak. This man is as responsible as any for the deaths of my family. For Brandon Stark, for Rickard Stark, for Rhaegar Targaryen. For Rhaegar Targaryen, for Aegon Targaryen. And for Aegon Targaryen, and for Ethel Martell. He saw Jade struggle a little and compose himself before he continued. For Rhaegar Targaryen, and for Lyanna Targaryen. Their blood is on his hands, and though it brings me no respite for their loss, nothing ever could. It is in their names and in the name of justice, and not vengeance, that Jon Arryn will lose his head here today. He heard the gasp when Jaxlias pulled Blackfyre from his back, and then when Jon Arryn was placed over the block. The crowd realizing that the king's justice would be served by the king himself, and Ned looking to see the Great Jon, Meg and Jorah, Howland and Demeric, the Glovers, Karstarks and Robb, and Ara, all looking on with approval in their eyes. Our way is the old way, Robb said softly beside him. Ned looked out as Rhaegar took his position behind Jon Arryn. This man he had once been proud to call his foster father, who he had once looked up to as the epitome of all that was honorable and good and who had been a mummer. He felt nothing when Rhaegar raised the sword, and that it was clean was far more than the man deserved as he watched when his head was removed. He didn't feel sadness nor regret at his passing, nor did he feel avenged. Instead, just as Rhaegar had said, he felt justice had been served. King's Landing 2098 AC. Joy! Waiting back in Casterly Rock had been hard. She had wished for news and had been brushed off and told all was well each time she'd asked for any. True, she was a child and perhaps too young to be told at all, but that's all she wished for. To know that her father was unharmed, that Cregan and Yumi, that Tyrion was unharmed, and to know that Jon was unharmed. She and Balerion would cuddle up at night and she'd offer prayers to the Seven. Joy would ask them to protect the people she loved and cared about. Then she'd wait for news, and yet each day they'd treat her like a child and tell her all was well. When the news came that it was all over, she had rushed to the Sept and offered up her thanks to the mother for protecting them all. It was a new thing for her to really spend any time in the Sept, and she at first hated it. But the longer the news was kept from her, the more she found herself inside lighting candles and offering up prayers. Each day since she found out that it was over felt almost as long as the days they'd all been away. Though at least these days were spent with the knowledge that her family was safe. The night before they were due to set off for King's Landing, Ashera came to give her news she'd not been expecting. She was to be allowed to take apples with her. She had been so excited by that, the idea of being able to ride apples with Jon and Winter once again, to see new lands while they raced across them. Though she felt sad that Balerion wouldn't be coming with them. Joy knew little about Balerion's time in King's Landing, only that Jon had told her that he didn't like it much there, and that it had something to do with Jon's other sister, Rhaenys. I'm sorry, Balan, to leave you alone. I'll come home as soon as I can. I promise, she said to him, as he snuggled up beside her, the night before they left. The next morning, though, Balerion wished to come. He wouldn't leave her alone, and she smiled at that, happy to have him with her on the journey and in King's Landing once they got there. As they got closer, though, things start making her nervous, little thoughts of Jon based on what Jaina would say to her. How she'd tell her that she needed to behave much differently once they arrived, making Joy almost wish he'd never gone for the Iron Throne. Joy, I know how you wish to be with Jon, but things are different now. You cannot act how you do. Why? She asked, trying not to sound annoyed. Because Jon is the king now, people must act around him as if he's the king. Remember how you had to act around King Robert? Jane said. Jon is nothing like that fat king, she said, shaking her head. I know, sweetling, but he is the king all the same, and you must act the perfect lady that you are when you're with him. Always? She asked, almost shocked by the idea. Mainly when you're in public. In private, you may be allowed to be more yourself. That was at least something she thought. She could act a lady in public if need be, as long as when they were alone, she could be herself. The night before they landed in King's Landing, she heard Ashera, Kevin, Dorna, and Jenna speaking on protocol and differences, and how, with Jon as king, even they must act differently. She laughed when Jenna spoke of their talk, and when she said that she doubted that she would pay too much attention to it. Mark my words, I give it less than an hour. Jaina said, and Joy smiled all the way back to her cabin. It turned out to be far less time than that. Once they arrived and took the carriages, and as they then lined up to greet the new king, it wasn't him that she found herself face to face with. It was Yun. Joy had known he'd never make her be what she was not. King or not. He was the one person who always allowed her to be herself, and just seeing that hadn't changed was what made her run and hug him. Feeling him hug her back for the first time in moons almost made the wait to see him again worthwhile. Almost. Hearing him whisper in her ear that they would ride together in a day or two, and even though she didn't get to spend all her time with him, the king was busy after all. Joy knew that, and didn't expect it, but that he made so much time for her was something she most appreciated. Seeing her father again, Cregan and her cousins too, also kept her busy, and yet it was walking around the Red Keep with Jon as her guide that she enjoyed most of all. "Where are your rooms?" she asked, as they strolled down the halls. "The royal apartments are down here," Jon said. "And you have to stay here now, for always?" she asked. "Mostly, though I can get to leave, and unlike other kings, I intend to. My family used to do something called a royal procession. They'd go visit the lands they ruled, spend time with the people, the lords and ladies, the small folk. They talk to them and listen to their needs." "And you will do this?" "Aye, that, and well, I have a dragon," he said, making her giggle. "So you can visit me in Castamere?" she asked hopefully. "I can, and you can visit me here. You can stay here as much as you wish," he said as they entered his rooms. "What if I wanted to foster here?" she asked. "Do you?" "I don't, maybe," she said, biting her lip. "Joy, if you wished it, you know I'd see it so. If you wish to come and stay for a few moons, or to visit any time you wanted, ask it, and I'll make it so," Jon said, and she moved over and hugged him. "Thank you, your grace," she said, giving him a curtsy when he let her go. "Usse," he said, pretending to frown, which she returned as best she could. "But your grace, I am a lady, and I must behave properly," she said, her mummery of Jaina having got better.
"Yoe."
"I cannot, for what would people think of me?" she said, making her own voice sound far more ladylike than ever, Jon's frown now threatening to leave his face as she saw the corners of his lips twitch. "Yo, it tickles," Jon said, and she shrieked, laughing loudly as he swept her up and began tickling her. After a few moments, he stopped and sent out for some food and some drinks. Joy, finding herself eager for both. "Bilio wished to come too, Jon," she said as she drank the peach juice he'd had brought for her, and he ate some grapes. "He did? I had thought he wouldn't wish to be here." "I think he missed Rhaegar." "Where is she?" she asked. "She's with Rhaegar and Dany's dragons." "Dany, my aunt, like Jaina, is yours. Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen," Jon said, and Joy looked at him confused. "Why is she called Stormborn?" she asked curiously. "The night she was born was the greatest storm in memory. The winds blew so strong that they moved ships on the sea as if they were nothing. Yet the loudest noise was the sound of my aunt as she was born. Her shouts even louder than the winds," Jon said with a smile, and she laughed as he told her the story. "She was born here. No Dragonstone," Jon said, and then looked at her as she readied to ask. "Aye, I'll take you to Dragonstone." He left her back to her room that night, and though he didn't tell her a story, he had already done so. He did promise to ride with her on the morrow. When she woke up the next morning and broke her fast, she found he didn't arrive when she had thought he would, and though disappointed, she knew he was busy, and so she had prepared herself for the possibility that he may not have the time for their ride. It was an hour later, though, that he did arrive, and she tried her best not to laugh when he said he'd overslept. Riding through the city was strange, as was the large party they rode with. Margaery was there, and Jon's sisters along with Cregan and Jon's brother. Lors rode with a strange expression on his face, one matched by the other men wearing white cloaks, and she did her best to make him laugh, something which Jon kept smirking at her for. When they reached the open fields, she looked to Jon, who was speaking softly to Margaery. After he kissed her on the cheek, he made his way over to her. Winter and apples together for the first time in moons, and she giggled when Ghost made his way over a moment later. "Joy, race," Jon said, and then they were off. Not even the shouts of your grace from the men in white cloaks was enough to stop them as they rode fast, her laughter ringing out as she edged in front, and though she lost, she had been closer to winning, truly, than she had ever been. Not that she cared, instead just doing this, riding here, being with her brother, for that's what Jon had always been. This was the greatest victory of all. King's Landing 2098 AC. Jaime, any man fool enough to think that, with his sisters here, Jay would act kingly all the time. Really knew nothing. Luckily, though, the small council was filled with anything but foolish men, and today they'd be welcoming more members. He sat in the king's rooms, listening as Jay told him about going to Dragonstone with Joy and Arya when he could. As he spoke of taking Margaery there as soon as he was able, and he found himself thinking on Rhaegar. His prince had always wished to be away from King's Landing, though for much different reasons, of course, and it seems his son had inherited a bit of that in his too. It's why he had been so surprised when he was told that he intended to make Daenerys the princess of Dragonstone, and that was raising the seat to a great house in its own right. Increased lands, a larger force, a section of the fleet to be controlled by House Targaryen itself, rather than by the crown. Had it not been for Tyrion explaining it to him then, he'd not have understood it. And even after he had, James still didn't fully see the benefits, only the problems. One of which he imagined he'd hear about very soon, as he heard the knock on the door, and Tommen moved to open it. Though it was only Margaery and Mira Forrester who entered the room, had Jamesy wondering where the Queen of Thorns was. "Is his grace not ready?" Margaery asked, looking around to see where Jerry was. "I believe he's having trouble with his new clothing, your grace," Jaime said. Though not yet officially a queen, all who knew of the marriage addressed her as such in private. "Why are there so many damn buttons?" Jack said, walking from his rooms, the dress coat still unfastened, and both he and Margaery chuckled when they saw him. "Here, let me," Margaery said, and he watched as she closed up the coat. Jack staring at her all the time, and he found himself glad the wedding was to be soon. Given how they looked at each other, he doubted they could wait much longer to be together. Once it was done, both Jay and Margaery took their seats. Jay behind his desk and Margaery a little to the side. He then took his own, and Tommen and Mira took up their own positions. He watched as Jay moved the parchment and paper to Margaery and bid her sign them, her name to be written under the king's own on the appointment papers. Lord Wyman was the first to enter, Jay saying he wished to have the Lord of White Harbor as part of their council, and Jaime most pleased with that. Your grace, Wyman said, bowing as Tommen let him in. "Please, my lord, take a seat. Help yourself to some food or wine if you wish." Jake said, and the Lord of White Harbor, who was never one to turn down such an offer, did as he was bid. "Thank you, your grace." "My lord, his grace and her grace asked you to join us today to offer you a seat on the small council, an expanded small council in which new masters will be named rather than just the traditional ones." Jaime said, "You honor me, your grace, your grace." Wax said, nodding to Jackson. And then Margaery, "I would name you my master of trade, Lord Wyman. You and Lord Wellis, as master of coin, will work closely together. As we both know so well, trade is the key, and while each region has its own particular areas of expertise, I would see the crown seek to expand it for all, and to act as arbitrators for any disputes. I can think of no one more suited for this role than you, my lord. I am most humbled by the offer, and I accept your grace." Ruzier Liben said as Jaime moved the parchment to him and had him sign it, handing it back to Jaxley, who used the king's seal to make it official. "Later today I intend a meeting of the small council, my lord, after which my Lord Hand will see you situated in your new offices." After Wyman it was Lord Willis, and Jay allowed Margaery to take the lead this time. Jaime watching on as the new queen did her job with aplomb. Then it was Sir Richard, Sir Barristan, Grandmaster Gorman, Prince Oberyn, and finally Lord Montfort Velaryon, who Jaime swore he saw a tear in the man's eye when he signed his papers. That he then had to do so with his own papers left him expecting some jape at his expense, and yet Jay kept himself much more serious and official, just as he had with the others. Jaime actually feeling it more apt for some reason. "Thank the gods that's done. Now can I take this thing off?" Jack said, fumbling with the buttons. "The small council meeting, your grace," Jaime said, reminding him. "I hate you," Jay said. And Jaime looked to Tommen and Mira, who were doing their best not to laugh, Margaery having no such reluctance. "You owned me so, your grace," he said, rolling his eyes and making the other two give in as he walked from the room to a glare from the king, one which he knew as false. He was the first to arrive at the small council meeting. Sir Richard, Prince Oberyn, and Lord Willas. Wyman, Gorman, Montfort, and Sir Barristan. And then Margaery and Jay arriving with Lady Olenna. As Jay bid them all remain in their seats, he expected this to be just a formality, and soon found it was anything but. The king had much on his mind, it seemed. "Later today or tomorrow, I'll speak to Lord Royce about the Vale, and to Lords Blackwood and Bracken about the Riverlands. Once done, I'll speak to my uncle about the North, and then to Lady Sir Davos and Lady Shireen about the Stormlands. But now I wish to hear your thoughts, and for them to be expressed freely on some other matters, some relating to those lands and some on changes I intend to incorporate. The first of these is the formation of a standing army. Jack said to surprised looks. A standing army, your grace? Sir Barristan asked, the bold being the first to compose himself. Aye, the crown from this point forward will no longer be dependent on its bannermen and the gold cloaks for its protection. Each great house has a standing force, a guard, if you will. Some lighter than others. Jane said, looking around at him, Prince Oberyn and Lady Olenna. The crown, too, shall have one. Would people not think that aggressive, your grace? Lord Wagon asked. Perhaps, my lord. Yet on this, I find I care not. My family, my house learned almost. It's ruin what happens when it relies on others. I'll not make the same mistake. When Sir Elizar and Sir Jeremy arrive from the Wall, they and the other loyalists will be appointed to the formation and training of a force who answer only to House Targaryen. Just as your own houses have their guards, mine will too. Are there any who take issue with this? Jaime looked around the room, finding that whether they did or did not, no one was willing to speak it aloud. Oberyn and Willis all looked happy by the news, as did Richard, and even he couldn't fail to see the logic in it. Will Dragonstone also be doing the same, your grace? Olenna asked, and Jaime wondered if the argument he'd expected was about to occur. It will, my lady. House Targaryen of Dragonstone and House Targaryen of King's Landing are separate entities. Separate, but joined. I've explained to my queen why I've made these decisions. I'll now explain my further thoughts if it'd please you. Jay asked. It would your grace, Olenna said. House Targaryen has always been split between King's Landing and Dragonstone. One house split in two, and neither fully able to protect itself the way other great houses are, even though mine own held the crown. The gold cloaks work for the city and are not an army. The household guard is small, and the King's Guard specialized. But when it was needed, the garrison at Dragonstone was unable to be called. Not only that, but it was unable to hold the island either. He watched as Jane reached for a glass of water, drinking it down before he continued. In the future, this won't be the case. No longer will Dragonstone be a smaller seat that the Crown Prince will use occasionally. From now on, it'll be a fully occupied seat held by a princess of the blood and will be managed appropriately. And the Crown Prince, Olenna asked. The firstborn babe that my wife and I will one day be lucky enough to have will take up the newly restored and expanded seat of Summerhall. A seat that also will be the equivalent of a great house and will have vassals and sworn houses appointed to it. A seat that will answer directly and only to House Targaryen of King's Landing. Jael said, to fully formed gasps this time. You intend to split the Stormlands? Oberyn asked with a smirk. I intend to allow those houses who supported me in the war, Dondarrion and others, to be sworn to Summerhall, Jag said. And should there be another babe? Willis asked, and Marjorie blushed. Harrenhal, Jay said to even louder gasps. Yancey listened as Jay-Z basically carved up the kingdoms. That Marjorie both blushed and looked worried as Jay spoke of creating seat after seat for future offspring. Olenna looked on greedily, and yet, when Jay noticed Marjorie's concern, he stopped speaking, leaning over to whisper something in her ear, which soon had her relaxing. They next talked about the trials and the wedding itself, the tourney which was to follow, and some other lesser important things. Yaxlamiri and Olenna stayed in the room when the others left, and he found himself walking with Oberyn, of all people. The prince was smirking all the while until he could take it no more, and needed to ask him why he was so pleased by this turn of events. Not that Jaime himself wasn't. More, he couldn't see the logic in all of it. My nephew is a snake. True, he's a wolf and a dragon, but he's a snake too, and snakes lie in wait until the right time to strike, Oberyn said. I don't understand. Strike who's left to strike at. No one. But should the time come, then unlike before, House Targaryen will be ready. They'll be everywhere, Jaime. Had it been always so, then my nephew and sister would still be alive this day. Oberyn said as he walked away, and Jaime found himself shuddering just a little. Here there be dragons, he said to himself as he walked to the Tower of the Hand. King's Landing 288 AC. Arya, though she had gotten to spend time with her family and Lyanna with hers and had spoken to Jon more than once, she'd not truly got to spend some time alone with him. Which was why today was something she was looking forward to, and was the reason she was rushing her morning meal. That her father, Elle, and even Robb all knew the reason for her eagerness was something she cared not about. The idea of sparring with Jon and with the Kingsguard too exciting for her to worry about her family being stupid. Her father had been so happy to see her when she arrived. He'd even told her how proud he was of her, and Jon had done the same thing. Both of them telling her that she was a fierce little wolf. She knew that Lyanna was being called a fierce little bear by her mother too, and that made her happy. She may have fought off Theon, but Lyanna helped fight the Ironborn too. When she had asked her father about Theon, he hadn't known what was to happen, and she'd not yet brought it up with Jon, instead waiting for the right time to do so. "Slow down, Arya. You'll bite one of your fingers off," Rhaegar chuckling as she ate the bread she dipped into her egg. "Shut up, stupid," she said before reaching for her milk. She heard the knock at the door and thought it was far too early for Jon to be coming, only to find to her horror that he was soon standing in front of the table. Arya trying her best not to blush as he looked at her and the egg which she hastily tried to wipe from her shirt. "I see some things never change. I'm glad I broke my fast alone, else she may have eaten all my food too," Jon said, and she smirked as she finished her meal and stood up. "Roosier," her father said, looking at her. "Sorry, father. May I be excused?" she asked, and bit her lip nervously. "Hey, but you've not to spar until we get there. I think we'd all like to see you face his grace," said, and she nodded eagerly at that. She was only just outside the door when he grabbed her, Jon mussing her hair and holding her tight, while she tried to push him off and not to laugh too much. "Look at you gods. Each time I see you, I'm amazed how much you've grown," Jon said, and she looked at him thinking he was japing as she didn't feel any bigger than she had been. "Maybe you've got smaller," she said, and he laughed. "Aye, maybe that's it. I hear you swing a mace now. Here I thought I'd be facing a wolf, and it turns out she's part bear. I can still use a sword, but the mace, it's easier." "And your archery?" he asked as they walked. "Aye, every day." They continued to talk as they walked the halls. Jon seemed in a far better mood, or at least a less serious one than she'd seen him in, and she remembered something her father said when she'd asked him about it. "Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown, little wolf. Just like Aegon insisted the Iron Throne be uncomfortable to sit on, a man whose king should bear the weight of the realm, and Jaehaerys does so." She'd not truly understood it, if she was being honest with herself. Though she did notice that at times Jon had the same expression she'd see on her father's or on Lady Maega's faces, and she wondered if that was it. If so, then she was glad she'd never be a lady with such responsibilities. She'd much prefer to be one like Lyra or Jory, or even like those Dornish girls she'd seen Jake speak to. The sand snakes she'd heard someone call them, daughters of Prince Oberyn, and as far from princesses as any Arya could imagine. "Here we are, now. Does Lady Meiji make you do warm-ups?" Jon asked. "Lozierin and Jory usually do," Arya said, smiling when she saw Lyanna and her mother walk their way. "Fine. Why don't you go to your friend and warm up while we wait on your father and Lady Al?" She ran over to Lyanna and told her excitedly that she was to spar with the king, quickly being asked if she could spar too, and running back to Jon to ask him if she could. Moments later, she and Lyanna were warming up, Jon looking at them while he spoke to Lady Mayu about something, and then she was giving the nod and walked over to pick up the blunted mace. Jon picked out a large blunted sword that confused her for a moment. "Why aren't you using the thin one?" she asked, thinking he was going easy on her and not liking it one bit. "I'm trying to get used to this one." "I gained another sword," Jon said, and she looked at him confused. Why would he want another sword? He had Dark Sister and had shown it to her. She'd not wish another sword with that one in her possession. Blackfire. Jon said, and she understood it all too well now. She watched as Jon took his stance, and she took her own. Waiting for the nod, she moved as soon as she got it, and Jaime parried her blow before moving back away from her. Rhaegar moved quickly and almost caught him out when she spun, only to nearly be tripped when he went to sweep her feet, laughing as she jumped over his leg. That he wasn't giving everything was clear, but she felt it was his power he was holding back on so as not to hurt her, rather than not trying to beat her. When he did, she was pleased to see him come over and tell her what she did wrong, and then she watched as Lyanna faced him. Soon enough, she'd faced him again, and also Loras, which she enjoyed, though it was when Sir Barristan stepped forward that almost meant as much to her as facing Jon did. After she'd been beaten, she heard a laugh and some claps, and she turned and scowled, thinking someone was making fun of her. The woman she saw, though, wasn't making fun of her, in fact, quite the opposite. "This must be the Arya you've told me about, nephew," Princess Daenerys said. "Aye, she is, just like you want. Arya much prefers sparring than being a proper lady," Jon said, and Arya looked to the princess with greater interest now. "Are you saying I'm not a proper lady?" Daenerys said with a smirk on her face, one which Arya found reminded her of Jon's. I'm saying that just like this little wolf here, neither of you has any manners when you break your fast. Jon said, chuckling, and Arya found her own smirk appearing. Yakur's Targaryen, take that back. I am a true lady, Daenerys said as she walked over to the sword rack. Don't make me prove it, she added as she picked up a sword. Very well, I retract my comment, Aunt. Perhaps you and my fierce little sister would like to spar? Daenerys looked at her and raised her eyebrow challengingly, and she nodded her agreement, quickly finding herself face to face with the princess as she moved forward with her mace. Though not as good as Jon, the princess was very good, and far too soon, Arya was yielding. Lyanna too, a few moments later, and then she watched as Jon and his aunt sparred. She laughed when Daenerys slipped, and as she got up, she tried to throw dirt in Jon's face. Jon ducking under it to laughs from the princess. You think I only learned to fight clean, Aunt? Jon said, and Daenerys didn't reply, trying to move faster as she attacked again and again. Rhea looked on shocked when the long sword was knocked from Jon's hand, though it was Daenerys who was more shocked as she found herself facing a small knife at her neck, and who quickly yielded. You bloody did that on purpose, you fucker, Daenerys said, and Arya looked to Lyanna and giggled. Hearing a princess speak like that was not what she had expected. I didn't actually... You took the sword, though, skilled Dany. I'm still getting used to a longer grip. But I wasn't going to just let you win now, was I? Jon said, and Arya looked as he and Dany started at each other before both laughed. No, I expect not, Daenerys, no, Dany said. As Jon and the princess walked over to her and Lyanna, though, Tommen came running with a note in his hand which Jon read and then frowned at, saying something to the boy before coming over to them. There's something I need to take care of. I'm sorry, Arya. Dany, can you spend some time with Arya? I may not make it back today. Sure, I'll find something to keep the little wolf occupied. Maybe I'll take her to see the dragons. Really? I can? She asked excitedly. Sure, why not? Jon said, and she nodded excitedly. It took some time to gather the horses, and she, Lyanna, and Jory ended up riding with the princess, a small girl called Missandei, and a group of men wearing brown leather, along with a man she'd heard about, called the Hound, and a large dark-skinned man called Strong Something. Try as she might, she couldn't help but look at the Hound's scarred face, and when he caught her, he glowered at her, forcing her to do the same back. She noticed his small smile afterward, and soon enough, they reached the dragon pit. Aradia looked to the sky, waiting, and finally the black dragon came into view. Beside it flew the gold and the green one, and yet she knew there were two others. Where's Rhaenys and Rhaegar? She asked, and Dany took a moment to answer. So focused was she on the dragons in the sky. Probably on Dragonstone. Rhaenys loves it there, and Rhaegar prefers to be with his sister. These ones don't? Lyanna asked. Elegon, Rhaegal, and Sandorix prefer both to be near their riders and to come here to be petted. They're still babes compared to Rhaegar and Rhaegar, Dany said. Which one is yours? She asked as the dragons landed. Elegon is mine. She's the black one. Wait here until I speak to them. Then come when I call. Dany said, looking at her until she nodded before walking over to rub the dragon's neck and speak some language that Arya knew not. When she was called over, both she and Lyanna almost ran to the dragons. Rhaegar had never been so excited. A dragon? She was going to touch a dragon. She couldn't believe it. As she ran her fingers over the scales and felt the warmth, she knew she was smiling beamingly, though it was nothing compared to how she was at dinner later that night. Once the dragons had left, Dany had spent most of the day with her and Lyanna, telling them of Essos and of cities that she'd only read about. That though wasn't the reason for her smile, it was what the princess had said as she was leaving that was, if we get a chance in a day or two, I'll speak to Jay about you riding with him or Tyrion. They have the saddles and it makes it easier to take passengers. On the dragon? You mean on the dragon? She asked, and Dottie nodded. Thank you, she said, hugging her much to her surprise. You're more than welcome, little wolf. Now go and don't get into too much mischief lest my nephew refuses. A dragon ride. She would perhaps get a dragon ride, and she found herself barely able to contain her joy at even the idea of such a thing. What surprised her even more was that it wasn't Jon she needed to thank for it, but his aunt, and it was her that she was thinking about as she went to her bed. A princess who rides a dragon in spars, who wields a sword, Visenya, she was Visenya reborn, and she was. Or maybe she could be her friend. King's Landing, 288 AC. Marjorie. Hearing Jade's plans had left her surprised, and also in a way, a little annoyed. She could see her grandmother seemed pleased by them, and yet to her it was that he'd not really discussed them with her. Instead, it seemed he was planning this whole life out for them. And she was almost an afterthought. Marguerite knew it wasn't so, and that she was being a little silly about it. Yet it irked her, and so she had been glad when he'd whispered in her ear that he'd speak to her later about everything. After the others had left the meeting, her grandmother had asked 1,000 questions, and she had sat there listening, learning it all for the first time. They were supposed to be a team in this together, and yet once again the plans he made left her out of them somewhat. Try as she might not to let it annoy her or distract her, she found she could not, and the rest of the day went by in a bit of a blur. She knew they had spoken to the High Septon, the fat man most keen to hear her ideas on the faith, and how her grandmother had stilled her tongue when he spoke. Only the seven themselves knew. What she had said to the man she couldn't even remember, and only her mother and grandmother telling her that she'd done a great job had allowed her to at least take some comfort that she'd not messed things up. Walking around the Great Sept had at least given her some respite from her troubled thoughts, and as she did so, she pictured the ceremony in her head. Later they were sitting in their rooms, going over music, the dishes to be served for the feast itself, arranging seating, and speaking of which, ladies she would take on as her ladies-in-waiting, when she found she could hold it in no more. So getting up from her seat, she bid her grandmother and mother goodbye for now and made her way to the king's rooms, finding a servant to send to fetch her husband so they could speak on things. That he came so quickly made her worry about what she had written in her note, and seeing the worried look on his face as he closed the door behind him only made her worry that much more. "Marguerite, what's wrong?" Jay asked as he looked at her face. "What?" "Everything, Jax. Everything is wrong," she said annoyedly. "Marge!" "These plans of yours, Jax, our children, spreading them out all through the kingdoms, splitting up kingdoms, appointing people, everything. I feel I'm being left out," she said, frustrated now. Margie seemed to be hurt by her words, confused or something she couldn't quite be certain of, and her first instinct was to comfort him, yet it was she who needed comfort more right then. "When you were at war, the decisions, the choices, I knew they were yours to make, and that I knew not how I may help. But this, Jane's supposed to be us, both of us, together, always," she said, and she sighed. "Gods, Marge, I didn't even realize, I thought." She felt his arms go around her and her own do the same to him, and they stood there for some time, just holding each other before he moved away and reached out for her hand. She allowed him to take it, and he walked with her further into the room. For the briefest moment, she saw the bed their bed, and she felt a little flutter in her stomach. He led her past the room, though, to a small soft couch, and she took her seat beside him on it, his arm going around her shoulder as she leaned in close to him. "I truly didn't realize I was doing that, with the war, being king. I feel myself having to be more than I am, or more than I'm ready to be, and so I'm trying to hold on to the things I know, making plans such as these. I feel comfortable doing so. The standing army, Dragonstone, our children, and what their place in the world may be. The realm, making it so my family is safe, that my house, our house is safe, on that I feel in control." Jay said, "And you know on other things?" she asked. "I feel adrift at times," he said softly. I am, so happy to have you here. To help me, to listen, to offer advice. From the moment we took the city, I've been counting the days, until you came so you could help me, so you could be my anchor. Yet you haven't allowed me to be so, Jay," she said sadly. "I know, I'm sorry. I wanted to show I could, that I was ready to be the king so much that I forgot what it was I really wanted. Which is, a queen to help me rule, to be what I cannot, and to tell me both when I'm right or when I'm wrong. You have one, if you wish it, that is." "I do, Marge, truly. I do. I'm sorry. Ask me anything. Any question, you're right. Together. Always," he said. And she kissed his cheek. They sat silently for some time before they began to speak. Firstly about the wedding and how soon it would be. She told him of her meeting with the fat Septonin, and how she'd barely remembered the day. Jaxley once again telling her how sorry he was. Then the subject turned to more about his plans, and soon she found herself agreeing, disagreeing, changing, and being told that this couldn't be changed. They spoke for hours, Jay sending out for food for them, and even through their meal they spoke about the realm. "Children, J.A., you seek to make our children a huge part of your plans, and yet we've spoken of not having any for some time, and even then you speak as if we'll have far too many, numerous, many, countless. Jane said with a chuckle, and she smirked. I thought you were japing, she said, shaking her head. What if we can't jay? What if for some reason we only have but one, or worse, if for some reason I can't? I told you, together always, Marge. But should I not? Should we not? Your plans, Jay? We are not the only Targaryens, Marguerite. If it is our children, then so be it. If not, then it will be Dameses or Tyrion's. As long as our house is safe, I care not whose line makes it so. So, were I not able, you'd not set me aside? She asked, worriedly. Marguerite, he said, moving from her, and she watched as he got up from his seat and knelt down in front of her, taking her hand in his I love you, from this day until my last day. I believe we're going to be gifted by the gods many children, but should we not be then? I care not, for they've already gifted me more than any man dares to dream for. They gifted me, you Marguerite. Anything else pales in comparison to that. The kisses they shared were deep, and she felt her hands slipping under his tunic, the muscles on his back tensing as her fingers stroked over them. As for his own, they too dipped beneath her clothing, and she shuddered as they bushed the outside of her leg, more so when they passed her knee and touched her thigh. She felt the loss when they retreated, and then she gasped when she felt his hand on her stomach, almost biting his lip when his hand moved up toward her breast. Jax, she said, her voice husky, as his fingers touched the underneath of her breast, and then she moaned as his fingers brushed over her hard nipple. They had never gone this far before, and her own hands didn't stay idle for long as they began to move down his back and into his breeches. She almost grabbed him and pulled him tighter to her when she felt two of his fingers roll her nipple between them. The moan she made swallowed by his hungry mouth as their tongues danced together. When he broke the kiss and moved away from her, she almost cried out, and it was only the look in his eyes that showed her how hard it was for him to do so. I'm sorry, forgive me, he said, blushing, and barely able to look her way when whatever had emboldened him had retreated for now. There is nothing to forgive, my love, she said softly. We almost, and soon we will, she said, and her voice had never sounded so wanton as it did right then. Something that certainly seemed appreciated given the look Jack gave her. Later that night she lay in her bed and her fingers brushed over her nipples as she did so. Yet try as she might, she couldn't replicate the feelings that Jay had managed to evoke. Her fingers were a poor substitute for his, and instead, as she rolled over, she smiled. Soon, she thought, soon it would, his fingers touching her once more. The fingers 2098 AC, cat. He rolled off her and she was glad of it. His sweaty brow had dripped all over her face, and she reached out to take the cloth to wipe herself clean. That he slept immediately once he was done was one of the main reasons she had for once instigated their laying together. Getting up from the bed under the pretense of using the privy should anyone question her, she quickly dressed and began to walk around the keep. When Peter slept, she found she did her best thinking, and since her own dreams were so troubled, she tried not to sleep unless she must. The news she'd overheard was enough to provoke her concern. The bastard had been crowned, and soon he'd come looking for them. House Royce had been called to court, and though someone called Harding now sat the Aerie, no one expected the Vale to do anything but bend the knee. Not that she had any faith or hopes for the Vale, since the knights had been defeated, but them kneeling made their position here ever more precarious. That their plans to leave were now being hurried along was something she had overheard, and then confirmed, looking through Petter's papers, given it was not from Petter's words only. Reinforced that she couldn't trust him, which meant yet another reason why she had no wish to go to Essos with the man, her husband, her savior. When the more time she spent with him, the more it was clear he was anything but. My lady? One of the servants asked as she walked the hall. I was off to the privy. My husband sleeps, and I'd not disturb him by using the one of our room, she said, hating that she needed to explain herself to the servant. But having realized that Petter questioned them all on her movements, she moved through the keep quiet and carefully. True, for all outward appearances she strolled, but she'd learned that all was not as it looked at the Draven, and that it shared more in common with the Bolton keep than she'd ever have imagined. People here were fearful, worried, afraid to incur Peter's displeasure, and she wondered how she'd never noticed that with those who worked for him before. Was she simply blind? Had she been so focused on the bastard and the dangers he posed that she'd missed out on an even bigger danger close at hand? The more time she spent with him, the more she was beginning to fear that to be true. Even now, thinking about how he'd stoked her fears regarding Jon Snow. She still hadn't figured out why that was, though, what he gained from it. Other than her, of course, but what was it Peter truly sought? Cat wasn't so full of herself that she thought she was his only goal. A part of it, yes. A large part, maybe, but there was more to his game than simply making her his. She reached the main door and strolled out into the courtyard, feeling the bitter chill of the wind in this bleak place, and yet welcoming it more than the warmth of the keep. A screech filled the air, and she looked to see the eagle fly and land on the tree, its eyes on her all the while, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. That it was looking at her was clear, and despite not wishing to go back inside the keep, despite the urge to run as far from here as she could, the eagle's eyes discomfited her so much that she turned to enter the keep once more. The Wolf's Wood was a place she rarely visited. It was a northern place for Northmen and women, a place for wolves and bears and not one for a trout. The howling of the wolves, the sounds of the twigs being stepped on, let her know that she wasn't alone and she no longer wished to be here. Turning around, she saw no pathway back, no road that would take her home or road that would take her forward. She was stuck here alone and the wolves were closing in. Running, she passed a tree and saw the eagle look at her, heard its screech, and then heard the howling of the wolves as they came ever closer. She fell to the ground more than once, and then in the distance she saw it. The gray walls had never looked so comforting as they did right then. Yet when she reached them, the gates were closed. The guards laughing as she begged for entry, and then she heard the beating of wings and looked to see the white dragon in the sky heading her way. The gap in the wall she found allowed her to get inside the keep, and soon she found herself in a cool, dark place, a place she'd rarely ever visited, and she looked at the statues as they glared at her. "Out! Begone! You don't belong here. You're not one of us." The voices called out, and she looked to see a woman. No, a sprit, a specter, as the woman that faced her was dead, wasn't she? "You dared. My son, you dared."
"I damn you, Cattle and Tully, to the seven hells I damn you."
Lyanna Stark called out before she shouted a word. "Ghost." She saw the red eyes as they moved towards her, and she turned and ran for the door, soon faced with the heavy crypt doors that she had always feared. That they were open was a relief, and as she looked back, she saw the red eyes getting ever closer. She gave it everything she had and made it through, slamming them behind her and breathing in relief only to see it in front of her. The white dragon stared at her with its deep purple eyes, and she looked up to see him on its back. He was dressed in black and red and wore a circlet covered in square-cut rubies. "Please, I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry. And yet, somehow, I just can't seem to care," the boy. "Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen," said. "Dracarys." She woke up screaming and found Petter leaning over her, holding her to the bed. She didn't even hear the woman come in or even taste the liquid as it was poured down her throat. Nor did she feel the cold as she was loaded into the carriage. She heard the screech, though. She saw the eyes of the eagle. She felt them looking at her as the carriage rode off. King's Landing 29.8 AC. Yaxios Targaryen. After he had left Margaziri back to her room, he tried to sleep and found he could not. The image of her face, the memory of her tongue, and the feel of her breast, still far too fresh in his mind. He'd instead tried to warg, opening the doors and seeing where they took him, feeling the sun on his back as he flew over the desert, or the cold wind as he rode through the north. Reaching out, he found his sister sleeping on Dragonstone, and knew he'd need to speak to Dati on that. The dragons would always see the island as their home, and that would need to be something they agreed upon. Once he'd seen Ghost and Winter and spent some time with both, he opened his eyes and walked to his desk. He was eager to get to work on some of his other plans. These far more personal, and so he wrote them as carefully as he could. Jaxley then read some of his father's letters, looking for answers to questions he'd not ever truly asked, and finally he fell asleep at his desk, only to be awakened by Tommen early the next morning. His sparring with Jaime was a little more irregular now that Daisy and Joanna were here, and so he sparred with Arthur or whoever was on duty before spending time training Tommen, as best as he could. It was yet another thing that he never found enough time for, and so he passed it off to the Kingsguard when he couldn't manage it himself. After washing and changing his clothing, he walked to Gerion's room to break his fast and to do the first of the many things he'd waited so long to do. He was glad to find that Cregan had gone to break his own with his mother and the Starks, and that it would only be the three of them here for this. "Jaime, Joy," said as soon as he entered, and before he knew it, he first had her hugging him, before he was saying hello to Balerion and then to Geryon himself. "I wasn't sure what time you'd join us, so we may have started without you," Jaeger said, and he just nodded, looking to Jai, who he had no doubt was the reason for that. "Someone was hungry, eh?" he said, and saw Joy smirk. After eating his meal and listening to Joy tell him of having to chase Belian through the keep, he sat with his juice and reached into his pocket before taking out the scroll and handing it to Gurion. He watched as he read it, as he saw what it was, and as he looked to him, and then to Joy. "You're sure, Jay?" he asked. "Of this? Aye, this is something I've never been surer of," he said, looking to Joy. "What is this?" Joy asked, looking at them curiously. "Joy, remember when we explained why you're called Hill?" Jerian began, and Joy looked to him and nodded. "Well, now I'm the king. I can change that, and though you're still who you always are, and nothing can ever change that to me, to them, to the rest from now on, you're Joey Lannister. By order of the king," he said. And she looked to her father and reached out to take the paper in her hands. They'd spoken before of bastards and what it meant to be one, and Joy had taken comfort in the fact that he was one too, that they had that in common. It was the one doubt he had in his mind about legitimizing her, the idea that she may not feel the same or that it may make her think he felt differently about her. "So, like you?" Joy said, looking to him and confusing him for a moment. "Joy? Like you're not a Snow?" "I'm not a Hill," she asked, and he nodded, seeing her smile and then watching as she hugged her father and then him. "Lady Joy Lannister," her father said. "Yo, Jay," she said, and Jay kissed her cheek and whispered in her ear. "Always to me, Yozi." From there it was to a small council meeting, and then on to the throne room for more trials. The main one of these being Stannis Baratheon's and Quentyn Martell's. That Oberyn wasn't around for either was not a surprise, and so instead he had his Uncle Ned, Jaime, and Mace act as judges. Stannis was brought out first, and that Jay hadn't gotten to speak to the man himself was purely down to being busy and not a slight. "Lord Stannis Baratheon, you are charged with treason. How do you plead?" Jaime shouted out. "Not guilty." "You rose to arms against the king, Lord Stannis. That's treason," Mace said loudly. "He was not my king," Stannis said. "True enough, my lord, yet I am king now, and you raised your arms and turned down an offer of parley. Did you not?" he asked. And Stannis nodded. "I did. My lords, forgive me if I'm wrong, but any man who rose to arms against Lord Stannis' brother, who refused to kneel when given the chance, what sentence did they face? For what charge?" he asked. "To lose their heads, or take the black, your grace," his Uncle Ned said. "Treason, your grace," Mace said. "Your verdict on Lord Stannis, my lords." "Guilty," his uncle said, as did Mace and Jaime. "Lord Stannis, you've been found guilty. We offer you the same choice your brother offered many men, the wall or your head." Jaime said, "The wall," Stannis said, and Jay nodded to the man as he was led out from the room, noticing him look to Shireen and Sir Davos as he was. Quentyn was brought in next, and the prince was as cocky as could be. It was clear he was obviously expecting someone to stand up for him. "Prince Quentyn Martell." "I choose trial by combat," the prince said loudly. "You have a champion?" Jaime asked. "My uncle, Prince Oberyn Martell," Quentyn said, looking around only to not see Oberyn anywhere. "My lords, I have a letter here from Prince Oberyn confirming he rejects the offer to stand as his nephew's champion," he said, moving forward. "You lie," Quentyn said. "No, nephew, he does not," Oberyn said, stepping into the throne room, Jay looking at him in surprise. "You'll not stand for family?" Quentyn said aghast. "I stand with my family, nephew," Oberyn said, walking past him and standing beside Jay. Quentyn welcomed the wall, as did the rest of the Dornish lords and knights, both those who'd joined with Quentyn in the Stormlands and those who'd attacked Highgarden. By the time they had dealt with the last of them, he called a halt to the proceedings. The Vale lords and Riverlanders who'd joined Edmure could be dealt with on the morrow. He wished instead to take the measure of some others, and to speak to his wife and her grandmother about the Reach and Riverlands and the changes he intended to make. Making his way through the halls, he passed Lord Raymond Derry and asked him to join him. The Lord of Derry only too happy to do so. Once they reached his rooms, he sent Tommen to find Margaery and Olenna, and invited Lord Raymond inside, bidding the man take a seat. He had thought long and hard about what to do with Raymond, and had even considered naming his Lord Paramount of the Riverlands at one time. Yet though it would have been a choice from his heart, it would have been a poor one, as Derry just didn't have the men or resources to be a great house. Something he could at least do something about now. "Lord Raymond, the lands that the usurper took from your family, the restrictions that were placed upon you in terms of men-at-arms, as of from today, that is to be changed. I hereby return every foot of land that was once in House Derry's control, and as your income from these lands begins to roll in, I leave it to you to begin to rebuild your numbers to what they once were," he said, looking at the man. "I thank you, your grace," Raymond said gratefully. I also intend to name you as the Riverlands Envoy, my lord. Other than the Lord Paramount himself, your voice will be the loudest heard when I speak on the Riverlands. I ask you to bring up any issues that the Riverlords or the small folk of the Riverlands may have, and I trust you to keep me informed of any problems that need my attention. Your Grace, you honor me. House Targaryen owes your house a great debt, Lord Reimagined. I'm only happy to repay it in any small way. He spoke to Lord Gary for a few more moments, bringing up the extra trading income and letting him know that would be staying for the next few years until the full extent of his returned lands income had started to roll back in. When Reimagined left, he sent for refreshments, know that Olenna would appreciate them when she arrived, and being relieved they arrived before his wife, and she did. He and Margaery had spoken on most of the things he was about to discuss with Olenna, and he wondered if she had spoken already to her grandmother about them, quickly finding out that she had not. While he'd given his small council a general view, only Margaery and he, and now Olenna, would know the full extent of his plans for now. One of the changes I intend, Olenna, is to do with any children Margaery and I have. But there's something that you need to know about that, and something I'd ask your advice on. Of course, Jaime. We don't wish to try for children immediately after we've wed. My mother was not much older than Margaery when I was born, and those circumstances were very much different. Both she and my grandmother lost their lives in the birthing bed. While I know waiting doesn't guarantee any more a woman's safety than not, it alone is not the only reason we've decided to do so. We wish some time for us, grandmother, to be us before we must have a family. Margaery said, and Olenna looked at them both. People will speak, Jade, of Margaery, of you even. Olenna said, raising her concerns, let them? I care not. Even should we not be blessed with children, though I believe most surely we will. Jack said, smiling at Margaery and thinking of the eggs he found as he was certain they were for their children. Margaery is my queen, my only queen. Olenna smiled a little herself before nodding, and Jay turned then to the rest of his plans regarding his children. Should we be blessed with more than one or two, then it won't be just Summerhall and Harrenhal I intend to create seats for them in. It's to be the North, Dorne, the Vale, and the Reach also. Your Grace? Olenna said, and he knew he'd shocked her by the fact she'd not used his name as he'd requested. My house suffered, my lady. It suffered from not understanding the issues and needs of each of the kingdoms. It suffered from the ambitions of men and the narrow-mindedness of maesters, too. But that alone wasn't the reason we almost fell. I intend for my family to be a part of the realm, to understand it, and I to rule it. Never again will a kingdom rise against my house, lest they find they must first deal with my house in their own. It was quiet for a few moments while Olenna took it in, and then he almost saw her mind work as she looked to him and Margaery. You intend to use your aunt and uncle's future children, too, don't you, Jay? Olenna asked. I intend to create many new seats, Olenna. If we're lucky enough to fill them with our children, then so be it. If not, then my aunt, my uncle, it matters not as long as House Targaryen grows strong, he said to a chuckle. For his good grandmother, I take it this is not all you've asked me here for, she asked, and he looked to Margaery, who spoke of his plans with Tarly. Jay intends to name Lord Tarly as the Reach's envoy grandmother. Margaery said, and Olenna looked at him. I'd name another, but it must be Lord Tarly. I need him brought close, and to name a different lord would no doubt to him be considered a slight. It would, these envoys, Jane. What difference is there between them and Lord Paramounts? What is to stop Randyll Tarly from becoming a more powerful voice than Mace or Willis? Lord Paramounts rule their kingdoms in my name, Olenna. Envoys will bring forth issues from their kingdoms, be it lords' issues that aren't resolved by the Lord Paramounts, small folk issues, or issues of the kingdoms itself. Yet they have no power. They merely speak with their own voices on their concerns. Some will be based here and may do a Lord Paramount's bidding. Others will visit from time to time. And Willis, mates, my good brother and good father, Olenna, my master of coin and Lord Paramount of the Reach, my wife's father and brother, if there are any who have a louder voice at the table than House Tyrell, then they wear a three-headed dragon on their breast. Jade said, looking to her, House Tyrell, House Lannister, House Stark, and House Martell, none will even come close or above them, other than mine own. The Riverlands, Stormlands, the Vale, and the Iron Islands, all will see changes, where the others will not. He was glad the answer seemed to relax her some, both that his ideas had the merit he thought they had, and that she didn't feel he was trying to pull the wool over her eyes. It was clear that even the Lannisters hadn't risen as high as House Tyrell, and their position was now one that no one could ever threaten. When Olenna left him alone with his wife and Margaery came over to sit with him on the couch, he noticed how she blushed at the memories and he found himself smiling. "Your family's house will always be one I seek to protect, Margaery," he said softly. "I know, Jae, but our house, yours and mine, that will always be my priority. You, our family, the future, that is everything to me. Together, Margaery, always." "Always," she said, as she kissed him. King's Landing, 2098 AC. Oberyn. Were it not for Eloria's arrival and that she brought their babes with them, then he'd still be wallowing and grieving for his brother. Even despite what Doran had done, he was his blood, and Oberyn was the last of them now. He could never have forgiven him for going against Ilya's wishes, or for what he had done while their sister lived. He had known about Ilya and Fowler, that his sister cared for the man, and wished him for her own was not news to him. Yet he had never thought anything of the man's death other than knowing it had caused Alia pain. Had he then, in his anger, he may have become a kinslayer. When Jae had told him what he'd done, he breathed a huge sigh of relief. His nephew would have been well within his rights to see Doran dead, and yet he'd spared him, only for the gods to decide that he needed to answer to them also for what he'd done. Oberyn had drunk. He'd removed himself and barely done his duties, and that Jae and his girls knew to leave him be was something he was thankful for. Hearing she was here and had brought his girls with him had soon woken him up, and Illyria had both slapped him and hugged him, bringing him back from where he had been. That Jae had then sat her at the high table, that he'd not allowed anyone to look at her as less than she was, only further proved that he was Alea's son in spirit, if not blood. Now, though, they'd been asked to attend a private dinner, and Jae finally had the time to meet his girls properly. So as Jarlaer dressed and made sure Leia and Abella dressed properly for once, and as Jarla spoke to Taia, Nymeria and Obera, he sat with Doria and Loreza, both girls playing on the floor in front of him. To say it was a boon to his soul to see them so happy was like saying the sun would rise on the morrow, he thought with a smirk. "Papa, what is our cousin like?" Doria asked. "He is the king," Lorzio told her. And Oberyn chuckled. "The Dragon King?" Daria asked, and Oberyn nodded. "I thought he was the Wolf King." Lorzy asked, confused. "He is. A wolf, a dragon, and a snake, too," Oberyn said. "Like us?" Doria asked happily. "Just like us," he said, looking at them both. Illyria walked into the room already dressed, and with Elia and Arabella, all three of them in matching outfits, bar the more adult nature of his paramours. "Come, girls, let me look at you both," Illyria said as Doria and Loreza stood up, their mother fixing their dresses and wiping Doria's face where she'd somehow managed to get some dirt on her cheek. As he stood up, Illyria looked to him, Oberyn making a show of turning around, his own clothing quickly garnering her approval. They walked to the king's rooms, Illyria holding their youngest girls by the hands while he walked with Alea and Obella, both of his older girls trying their best to look like their sisters. Serthra and Sarah Richard were the two Kingsguard on duty, and as the door was opened, any attempt at pretense or being what they were not was soon lost once Lorisa saw Ghost.